To get your attention, right? Hey! Oh, wait, we're doing this again? Okay. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Marie Hardin, and I'm Dean of the Donald P. Belisario College of Communications over in Happy Valley, but here we are in Washington, D.C., and I'm so happy to see all of you. I want to mention that we have our all-star team of staff and faculty that many of you already know. We have Mike Poorman with us, we have Steve Samsel, we have George Barron, we have Paris Palmer, and we have some faculty with us. We have Maggie Messett and John Affleck, and am I missing any other faculty? I think that might be it. Let's give all of them a round of applause. You all know them. I also want to mention one other person. I hope you get a chance to meet her and talk with her if you don't already know her. Jackie Jones is with us. She is Dean of the School of Global Journalism and Communication at Morgan State University. And I always like to mention it when Jackie's here because she may be a familiar face to some of the alumni because she was a faculty member at Penn State and a colleague of mine for a number of years. So thank you for being here, Jackie. All right, well, before we get to the award, I want to give all of you an update about what's happening in the college and at Penn State. For us, commencement was last weekend, but our school year certainly isn't over yet, and I want to explain what I mean by that, and it will explain some of the young people we have here with us actually tonight. So we had 695 undergraduates cross the stage. Allie Krieger, and that may be a familiar name to you if you're all familiar with Women's World Cup soccer. She was our commencement speaker, so we were really excited about that. But some things that are happening in the next weeks and months include our American Advertising Federation team, a competitive team, will be going to the national competition in Salt Lake City in a couple of weeks, so we're very excited about that. It's the first time in more than a dozen years that we've had a team at nationals, so that's coming up. The Hearst Foundation's National Journalism Intercollegiate Competition, many of you are familiar with that. We enter every year. We do extremely well every year. We just found out that we had 2 teams place in the top 20 for investigative journalism. Josie, I thought you might be interested in that, and I'll be introducing Josie a little bit later, but we had 2 teams placed in the top 20. We also, again, have a finalist going out to San Francisco for the National Writing Competition, and we're very excited about that. Now, many of you have probably noticed we have some students with us tonight. And I'm really excited about these students being here. This is yet another extension of the year beyond commencement. We have a Maymester class right here in Washington, D.C., and the students are working on reporting projects around insecurity in housing and food right here in Washington, D.C. for the residents here. It involves data-driven reporting, it involves on-the-ground reporting, and these students are spending time with journalists and other leaders in the community here, so I'm so excited about this class. It lasts for a couple more weeks. Maggie Messett, whom I mentioned earlier, she's director of our news lab. She's leading this class. Students, can you stand so we can applaud you and thank you for being here? And I look forward to seeing all of your work, students. So thank you. I also want to mention that we continue to prepare for sending students to cover the Paralympics. And they'll do that in partnership with the Associated Press. That is at the end of the summer, and John Affleck will be leading that team to the Paralympics. We covered the Women's World Cup with the Associated Press. Boy, that was last summer, wasn't it? Last summer. Wow, time flies. So lots happening right through the summer for us. I also want to mention that we continue to do some great hiring. We're growing the college. We're growing our faculty. Some of you might know Bart Richards, who led the Washington program for many years. He's retiring. He's the longest serving faculty member in the college. but he's retiring at the end of June. We are looking for a new professor of First Amendment Studies, which was his specialty, but we're also making hires of faculty to join us teaching in journalism and broadcasting and entrepreneurship and innovation. It's really an exciting time for the college. We are also hiring a director of our new News Consortium. Now, what is our News Consortium? It's a partnership among 5 student media organizations in the college. The Daily Collegian, and I may have some folks who've worked for the Daily Collegian here, Center County Reports, our PSN TV, The Line, which is an FM station, and our COM Radio. All those student organizations coming together to do really powerful journalism, and we'll be hiring a News Consortium director pretty soon. So we're excited about all of the things that we have going on. We continue to grow our presence here in Washington with an annual jobs and internships fair that takes place every October. We continue to grow that program, and we will be partnering with the College of Liberal Arts to grow our internship presence here in DC. So lots of exciting things happening. Whew. But enough about us. Let's talk about our award winner tonight. I'm very excited. We do this every year. You have the program talking about the Bart Richards Award for Media Criticism. This award, and you can read about this in your program, it's because of George T. Richards and his wife Ann, their visionary support here in terms of endowing an award in 1994 to honor his father, Bart Richards, who was a longtime editor of the Newcastle News in Pennsylvania. Bart Richards was a highly respected editor. He was also one of the founders of the Pennsylvania Society of Newspaper Editors. He was known by his peers as a fearless, creative, and persistent journalist. Fearless, creative, and persistent. And I think we do a good job today of encouraging our journalism students to be fearless, creative, and persistent. So we're grateful to give this award every year. And again, in your program, you can see the list of really terrific winners over the years of this award. I want to emphasize the purpose of this award. It is to recognize distinguished contributions to the improvement of print and electronic news journalism through responsible analysis or critical evaluation. So it is intended to encourage new, innovative approaches to constructive journalism or media criticism. So I want to talk for just a minute about our winner tonight. He was honored once before, so you'll see his name another time in this program. He was honored in 2015 for his work on CNN's Reliable Sources. And of course, you can see there I'm talking about Brian Stelter. Interestingly enough, we see that this year he's going to be honored for his print work. The winner this year is a book called Network of Lies. Now, I've read that book, and Brian, I got to tell you, I found it troubling, fascinating, engrossing, and informative. It truly is an excellent insight into the forces that have driven decision-making at arguably the most powerful cable network, news network in the world, in terms of its impact on American democracy and consequently its counterparts around the globe. He was a unanimous selection of the judges, and we have one of the judges with us tonight, Steve Guyman, who is a retired editor with Bloomberg and has judged for us before. So thank you, Steve, for the work that you've done. And I want to say a couple other things about Brian. Besides having the distinction as the only winner in the past quarter, besides being winning this the second time, his distinction is also that he is the only winner in the past quarter century to be honored somewhere else than the National Press Club. And maybe some of you don't know, but we have, in the last quarter century, we had this award in New York City in 2015, and that's where Brian was honored once before at the New York Times. So we're going to hear from Brian. I'm going to leave the award right there. Brian, I'm not going to try to hand it to you. It's right there. for now. We're going to ask Brian to come up and make some comments, and then we're going to do a Q&A, and Josie Sturman, who is National Investigative Reporter with Investigative TV, is going to come up for the Q&A. So let's congratulate Brian.
That does look very breakable. Be very careful. I guess I can also take my name tag off. Thank you for the warm introduction. It's a perfect blurb for the paperback edition of the book that I'm working on as we speak. I have this terrible tendency when I write a book to want to rewrite it when it comes out in paperback. And so that's coming this September. And so I've been working on updating the story all week long. That's the funny thing and maybe the sad thing or the strange thing about writing a book. And we'll talk about that with Josie in a couple of minutes. You sometimes publish a book and you have no idea what's going to happen. You have no idea if anybody's going to read it or buy it, which are two separate things, by the way, buying it and then actually reading it. And then you wonder if anybody's going to remember it a month or a year later. Sometimes, and this was true for the first book I wrote about a decade ago about morning television, it was like a firework in the sky. It burned really bright for about a week, and then it disappeared. And now, thankfully, a decade later, it's the basis of a show on Apple TV called The Morning Show. So it's back in the sky as a firework. But oftentimes, books are like that. They're like a little firework in the sky. They burst really quickly and then disappear. And this award, for me, is so meaningful for a couple of reasons. The first is because it's a way to burst that book back up in the sky, to bring it back up into the sky, to share it again with a new audience. And so I'm grateful for the recognition for that reason. The story of the 2020 election, of the Trump presidency, of Trump's attempt to stay in office, of the pro-Trump media's support for him, the coup attempt in this Capitol. It's a really compelling story, an important story that resonates again this year. So I'm grateful to have the attention and the interest in the book. The other reason why I'm really honored and appreciative of this award is because it stands for something that we need more of. We need more of in this country, and that is good faith, constructive media criticism. You know, the word, when you read about Bart in your program, the word that I honed in on was the word constructive, the idea that he wanted to and his son wanted to recognize constructive criticism of the national and local media. So I've been doing this for about 20 years now. I started out as a blogger covering television news when I was a freshman in college up the road in Maryland at Towson University. I didn't even dream of applying to Penn State, I will admit, but I will encourage my children to now. So, I'm at my college. I'm discovering this idea of blogging, which was still brand new at the time. And I really blogged my way into a real job, then joining the New York Times after college. But it was only because of my years blogging that I was able to make that leap. I was writing about television news, never imagining that I could actually be on television news. I was already balding, and I didn't think there were jobs at like the CNN for heads like mine. But at the New York Times for years, for me it was like graduate school, learning the industry, learning the media beat more broadly. And I came to recognize that scrutiny of this industry, scrutiny of the media world, makes the media industry better, makes newsrooms stronger, makes the coverage and the news that you all consume better. And that's the intent when I write about something like Fox News and Donald Trump. When I write Network of Lies, it's an incendiary title to have the word lies in it. But as I think my sources at Fox know, as the executives at Fox know, as my sources in the Trump campaign know, I come at it with good faith, not to be destructive, not to tear anything down, not to say, shut that channel down or get rid of that thing, but instead to be constructive, to suggest a better pathway forward, to argue for a more nutritionist, what's that word? Nutritionist. Nutritious, there it is. I got it on the fourth try. I'm a little rusty behind a microphone these days. The idea is that we should be all advocating for a more nutritious meal in our media diet, more reliable, more fact-based, more truthy version of what we get out there in this saturated information world. So that's the way that I approach writing about, covering, critiquing the media, whether it's writing about Fox News or nowadays also writing about my old home, CNN. I was grateful to be at CNN for about a decade, so I was living it. I was on TV, but also analyzing the television world, analyzing the media world. And I came to believe that effective media criticism is possible when you're sitting right on the edge of the fence, when you have one leg inside, and you have one leg on the outside, when you are straddling that fence and you're able to explain what's going on the inside, in my case, what's going on inside morning shows or inside Fox News, but you're also keeping one leg outside so that you're able to view it the way that the public does, the way that viewers do, the way that readers do. And that's how I think about media criticism and media reporting. You need to be close to it. You need to see what's going on the inside. You need to understand how anchors or hosts might think. You need to understand why political propagandists do what they do. You need to understand the psychology of it. You need to know what goes into a well-researched story. You need to know how sloppy journalism gets published. You need to understand that from the inside, but then be able to translate it from the outside to the wider world. And I think when we do that, when we do that effectively, we're helping to make these institutions, these newsrooms, these brands, these media companies actually stronger and hold them accountable to the audiences that they serve. Maybe I'm a little bit naive even after doing this 20 years, but I know that it makes a difference. I see how it makes a difference. Even at Fox News, by the way, I see how it makes a difference, and I bet we'll be able to talk about that. But I appreciate the chance to talk about that with all of you tonight and to recognize Bart Richards' contributions as well. I loved reading his biography today, reminding myself of his experiences, not just in journalism, but also then to go and run for office in the Pennsylvania General Assembly and to organize for the American Legion. It's been on my mind a lot lately because I'm sort of in between jobs these days, and happily so. The CNN program that I hosted was canceled almost 2 years ago. It was a pretty sudden shock for me, but it turned out to be the best thing that's ever happened for me because my kids are 6 and 4 now. I'm the stay-at-home dad. I'm the one taking them to school in the morning and the one going on a school field trip tomorrow morning in New Jersey. And my best title now is Class Dad. And it's actually helped me see the media world differently. It's helped me think about the beat that I still cover differently. So I host a podcast for Vanity Fair. I write for lots of magazines and publications, but I'm doing it at a slightly slower pace on purpose because I want to think about these issues and these topics more like an ordinary, gosh, the word's not ordinary, more like a normal viewer or reader, more like a normal citizen, more like a normal voter, but also a normal non-voter because so many people are disengaged from our politics. So many people are exhausted and fed up by the state of our politics and our country. And so to be, again, a little bit on the outside, still with one leg on the inside, you can see I'm wearing my TV makeup. I look a little Trumpy with my orange makeup tonight. I was over at NBC at 5 p.m. talking about the Trump trial. But I also now have more of a leg on the outside, as I was saying, because I'm not just working at one place. I'm not just reporting to one boss. I'm able to see the landscape a little bit differently. And it's been a real gift to think about media in a slightly different way as a result. So this award and reading about Bart and thinking about all of you, it inspires me to think about what that next chapter might be, what that next thing could be, what that next startup is, or maybe that next blog, and how I can continue to constructively critique and try to improve this media landscape that we all share. I don't know about you all, but to me it feels like we live in this kind of world of information pollution. It's a very, very saturated and polluted landscape out there. There's so much treasure, but there's also so much trash. It's kind of like we're all stuck at the garbage dump together, and we all have to sort it ourselves. Is this story, not only is this story real, but also is it valuable? Is it adding new information? Is it relevant? Is it worthy of an award or worthy of a book? Or is it just trash? Is it a bunch of junk? Is it nonsense? There's so much of all of it. It can be so confusing for all of us. And that's what I want to keep exploring as I write about this beat, as I explore this issue and try to examine the media world, both inside and out. But that's the boring part. Let's get to the fun part, which are the questions from Josie and from all of you. So I'm going to take my seat over here and be careful up on stage.
All right.
Hello.
Brian's field trip tomorrow is to the zoo.
Yes, we're going to the zoo.
After reading this
9
book,
a.m.
he feels well prepared, I have to say. He's all set. And when you're being interviewed by an investigative reporter, we take a lot of notes, so you can see I'm all prepared.
You didn't just buy it, you read it.
No, I read it.
See what I'm saying about the difference?
Yes, amazing.
Thank you.
So I wanted to start out, and I warned you about this. One of my favorite parts of the book is a reference to a fantastic show. If you have not seen it, it says a lot about the state of media today, including some companies that I may or may not have worked for before. It's the show Succession.
Succession.
And it talks a lot about the media landscape through a different lens, and it talks about this concept of the pain sponge, something Brian writes about in the book and identifies a particular Fox executive as the pain sponge, the person who takes all the hits so the company can keep moving. Yeah. Well, when the New York Times reviewed Brian's book, they referred to him as the nation's pain sponge because he had to watch so much of this coverage to dissect it. So the first question has to be, what's it like to be the nation's pain sponge and ingest and then digest all of this content to construct a book like this?
What am I supposed to say? I feel really wet? What am I supposed to say to that? I'm trying to think of the qualities of a sponge. What are the characteristics of a sponge, right? A sponge actually does serve a really valuable purpose. And maybe I am trying to help clean up this misinformation landscape a tiny little bit. But that goes to what I was just saying about what Fox is and what does it represent in the landscape, right? Fox is many things in one. And I'm not the kind of guy that's going to sit up here and say, the FCC should try to shut it down, to take away the license. By the way, they're not even licensed. It's a cable network. There is no broadcast license for Fox News. Let's get that out of the way. I sometimes, though, hear from folks who misunderstand what I'm saying, and they think, you just don't like them. You think you're jealous of Greg Gutfeld's great haircut or whatever it is. And the reality is, I think the country needs a really strong and serious Fox News. The country needs more conservative journalism, but less conservative propaganda. More conservative reporting, less conservative nonsense that's just in service of whatever candidate happens to be in charge. And that's honestly why I feel like I had to be the pain sponge and write about this. I wrote a book in 2020 during the pandemic called Hoax, which was initially, it was my first book about Trump and Fox News. And the reason I wrote it, and I think this is relevant for the students in the audience, when you're covering a beat, when you're covering a subject, when you're interested in a topic, and you feel like, there's an angle that's been left out, something that's been missed, you gotta go own that story, right? For me, there were like 100 books written about Donald Trump during his presidency, but nobody had written about his media diet. Nobody had written about his obsession with Fox, and also Fox's obsession with him. Now, I would argue those were mutually beneficial, but also really bad for each other at the same time. Is that possible? It's kind of like booze, I guess. Feels good in the moment, but then you get hungover. That was Trump and Fox. And so I wrote that book in 2020. Honestly, I thought I was done with the subject. Didn't really want to write about it again. But then Trump lies about the election. Fox helps him. Fox encourages him to be deluded about the election. Some Fox fans buy tickets to fly here to go visit the Capitol. And then really, really surprising things start to happen. Dominion, this tiny voting company no one had heard of, sues Fox. Smartmatic sues Fox. These companies sue for defamation. And not only do they sue, they prevail. They start to win in the courts. They actually are able to make progress in the courts and get Fox's emails and get the texts and get the inside documents. This has never happened to any major media company in America. It's like the world's worst X-ray or MRI or whatever it is. It's the most invasive exam you could imagine for a media company, and it happened at Fox. And that's why I had to write Network of Lies and be the pain sponge, is because there was so much information that came out through these legal battles that someone had to write it all down.
I want to get to the point of one of the first things you said in that is that there is a need for conservative journalism. And you cite the reporters at Fox News who were conducting themselves as journalists as opposed to some other folks that were at the network. So I'm curious for you as an observer and a critic of the media landscape, how do we convince the audience and help the audience to understand the difference between potentially advocacy journalism, which is seeking to make change and get things fixed, and what you label as crusading journalists who are more like opinion hosts who are masquerading? How do we convince the audience and help them understand the difference?
Right. Yeah, I try not to paint with too broad a brush when talking about Fox, because I was hanging out with somebody at Fox last night who I think is reality-based. And I think that's the distinction we should try to draw whenever possible. It's not easy, and it doesn't come always automatically, but people who are kind of existing in a shared reality where there are facts and data versus folks who are only talking about what they hope is true or they want to be true or what they want to make true via force. And that is more of the propaganda wing that I see that frankly is quite large at Fox. But to go back to the reality-based side, there are, one of my favorite parts of the Fox News machine is Fox Weather. It's a 24/7 weather network, and they've got tornado chasers, and they're accurately reporting the weather, right? No one disbelieves the weather forecast any more than you do any other channel. So they are, and by the way, when people ask me, well, if I'm graduating college and I have a job offer from Fox, should I take it? I say, if it's at Fox Weather, if it's at Fox News in the newsroom, now it might be hard to move up the ranks 10 years from now, but yes, it's a great place to get started. Where I think Fox deserves a lot of scrutiny, even more than it gets, is in the propaganda part. The Jesse Waters and Greg Gutfeld and Sean Hannity, Maria Bartiromo, these pro-Trump devotees, Jeanine Pirro, who went to the trial just to hang out last week. These are figures who they're not reporting what is true, they're fantasizing about what they want to be true, they're trying to make be true. And I'm afraid I'm dodging your question, because I think helping people see the difference is very difficult. And I've not always been the best person on this. I know that there were days at CNN when I was on Sunday morning, and I would be talking about the facts of the story 1 minute, and then I'd be mouthing off with my point of view within the next minute, and so I was, I don't want to say part of the problem. I see there's a camera over there, but I was certainly mingling, right? I was some of that brackish water that I'm also critical of when it comes to Fox. Here's, I think, the big difference, though, between CNN or ABC or NBC or CBS or all the rest, all these great local broadcasters versus what we see at Fox News and Newsmax. The difference is that there are not strong newsrooms at Fox or Newsmax that are gathering facts that then get blurred in with the brackish water or get blurred in with the opinions. They're not gathering that much news at all. There's a few great reporters at Fox, but for the most part, they're only really complaining about the news they're hearing from other channels. And so what I would encourage folks, and what I would say if we're talking about a news literacy conversation, is to look for primary sources, people who are actually pursuing and part of the, people who are at the Trump trial, who were in the courtroom today, as opposed to people who were just reading about it on Twitter, right? And there's a value in reading about it, there's a value in analyzing it, but I really want to hear from the people that were in the courtroom, the people who were witnessing it firsthand. And to the extent that we can make those divisions between people who are on the ground versus folks who are just guessing or complaining, I guess that's one of the distinctions we can draw.
So much of your book focuses obviously on the Dominion case, on this issue of defamation. We've got a lot of students in the room who are obviously going to learn about this through their education at Penn State and then out in the real world, potentially through hard lessons. What you point out, what you were just talking about now, is that there was almost sort of like a willful ignorance at times about the actual facts of the Dominion case. And so to prove defamation, as you guys may learn in your classes at Penn State, you have to show malice. So I'm curious, in your experience covering these people, if someone is willfully ignorant, is that malicious?
Gosh, we should just start class right now. This is great, right? So I'll start with a story that I think is funny, but you might think is horrific.
I'm sure I will.
Yeah, I was fired by CNN in August 2022. I love the F word. And I went to the county fair with my daughter a few weeks later, and we're on the Ferris wheel. And I shouldn't have looked at my phone, because I was taking selfies, but I shouldn't have looked at my phone. I looked at my email, and I had an email from a fact checker who said, Brian, there's this website that says that you've been arrested by a military tribunal for some unspeakable crime that I won't even say out loud. And so we're going around the Ferris wheel, and I'm thinking, how do I prove I'm not arrested? I guess I take a selfie, right? Like, here I am, you know? Like, but this fact checker, you know, it was nice of them to at least follow up. A couple weeks later, same fact checker asked me, this website, this fake news website, it now says that you have been sentenced to death at Guantanamo Bay. And I didn't know what to do. Now, this wonderful woman at the Pentagon, God bless her, she confirmed I was not in military custody. So that debunked the story. And I really owe that PIO something. But 2 weeks later, the same fake news site said I had been executed. I was killed. I was executed at Guantanamo Bay. And I found myself thinking, how am I supposed to debunk that? Like, what do I do? Like, what? Now, I'm a public figure, so I can handle it. It's okay. It's kind of, to me, it's funny. To my brothers, it wasn't very funny. But, you know, to me, it was funny. I tell that story to say, there's nothing I could really do. There's no one I could sue, right? I couldn't sue for defamation against this obscure fake news website that's just trying to get clicks and a few dollars of ad money, right? They're just in it for the page views and the lols. And by the way, if you search my name on Twitter, Brian Stelter Gitmo, you'll see people believe it. And they're like, when I go on CNN now, they're like, what are you doing? We thought we killed you. But, you know, they haven't gotten rid of me yet. So there's a lot you can't do. There's a lot of limits, you know, in these situations. There's very little power you have when you're being smeared, when you're being slandered, when you're being lied about. But when you're Dominion or Smartmatic and the lies are really specific, right? In the case of Dominion, really clearly disprovable lies. And that's what made this case unique. And by the way, still present tense today. Smartmatic is still suing Fox. Dominion is still suing Rudy Giuliani and Newsmax. There's going to be a Newsmax trial this September if they don't settle. So this is going to be a hot issue during the presidential election. I think the answer is, in these narrow cases, when you can build a bulletproof case, you can reach the point where you can prove actual malice by looking at the emails and texts inside Fox. So in the case of Dominion, the lawyers found that there were lots of fact checks being sent to the producers of Fox. And those producers were forwarding those fact checks to the hosts. So there was a chain of custody that you could show that people had eyes on the accurate information. Now, we don't know if a jury would have found Fox liable. We don't know if Dominion would have won in court because this was settled. But Fox clearly thought it was in enough danger that it paid almost $800 million to make this case go away. So that indicates to me that their lawyers saw that this could very well turn out badly for them, and the payout could have been much more than $800 million. So, you know, maybe we'll see one of these cases go to a jury. That'll be fascinating if we do, to get a test on actual malice. But certainly, I think these cases are revealing for the following reason. Again, there's little you can do when you're the CEO of a voting company and your staff's getting death threats and all that. One of the only things you can do is sue. And you know, we've seen these lawsuits, by the way, against CNN, against other outlets as well, for other issues. For example, like Michael Flynn, former Trump aide, sued CNN. It was thrown out. Most of these cases get thrown out. You know, I've had cases where I've been named. They usually get thrown out. But the courts are a mechanism for litigating these issues. And in the 2020 cases, we're seeing that, you know, it's actual real, the litigants are actually having success.
What does it say about Fox in that environment, that they were being hit with emails, with letters, with calls, with texts saying, what you're saying is not true, and here are the facts, and yet they continued undeterred by that? As a journalist in the room, if anybody has ever gotten a letter from a lawyer, a cease and desist, a takedown order, it stops our newsroom, our team, in its tracks. But for Fox, they were undeterred. So what does it say about their operation, that despite all of this, they continued forward and essentially endorsed it by not only airing the programs where these statements were made, but re-airing them? Yeah,
re-airing them. Isn't that so interesting? You just hit on an interesting page in the book, which is not only did these programs that were full of smears air live, they then re-aired later in the evening. And the Dominion lawyers felt that was one of the best facts they had if this had gone to trial, because they would have been able to go up on the stand and say, you re-aired it, you played these tapes. And that was the first thing I was taught at CNN. I bet you had the same kind of lesson in your career. First thing I was taught when I was this kid coming from the New York Times, joining CNN, again, the bald-ass guy, they say to me, here's what you gotta do. If you're interviewing a guest, you got this guest on the air and they say something outlandish or crazy, You just need to interrupt. What? What do you say? Say? It doesn't really matter how you interrupt, but cut them off. Not to cut their mic, but show that you are not on board with that statement. Show that you are not endorsing whatever that weird thing is that was just said. And this is not just for defamation law reasons, but one of the reasons was for legal protection reasons. You don't want to let some guest just ramble on with some nonsense and not interrupt in some way. But at Fox, they were doing the opposite of interrupting. They were encouraging the guests to keep this up. So why? I think the answer is because really it was the audience that was in charge, and not the bosses and not the hosts, but the audience that took charge. I think we can take that back to 2017 and the death of Roger Ailes, who had been the founding CEO of Fox News, this man who ruled with an iron fist, who had a very dark past and was sexually abusive towards some of his staffers, but was also beloved by many of his stars and hosts of the network because he was so clearly in charge. He was a dictator at that network, and the staff believed they needed a dictator. So he's forced out, he dies. Who takes over? Who fills the power vacuum? Donald Trump. It becomes Trump's network, it becomes his audience's network. And it becomes a situation where they whispered the truth about Biden winning, but then they shouted the lie about maybe Trump finding a way to reverse it, and maybe it'll go to the Supreme Court, and maybe somehow Trump will stay in power. They shouted the lie, they buried the truth, and it was because of those audience considerations, those audience impulses. And again, I try to be very transparent about that in the book. Like November of 2020, I'm on CNN covering the same story, oftentimes talking about Fox's behavior. And there was a Sunday morning where Maria Bartiromo's show on Fox was the #1 show on cable news, and my program was #2. Like, I felt the ratings. I look at the ratings. Of course I do. Of course I did. But I didn't want to win that audience that was being deluded about an election being stolen when most of us had already moved on. Like, do y'all remember that, like, Thanksgiving 2020? Like, it wasn't like we were all fighting about the election at dinner. Most folks had moved on. It's only now that the Trump base insists on saying that it was stolen, right? There was a moment in time in November of 2020 where all of this was avoidable. But I think in large part because of the television coverage, because no one was really in charge at Fox, because Rupert Murdoch was off chasing his next girlfriend, which I think is actually part of it.
His former girlfriend.
Yes, because he's now been
on.
engaged twice more, and he's getting married this summer. But I remember the feeling, like, new love, right? You don't think about anything else but that girl. So, excuse me, but I do think that's part of it. I think the lack of leadership, at the top levels, and this sense that they are going to do whatever the audience wants, is what created this environment where they shouted the lie and only whispered the truth.
I think that's really important. In your reporting, you talk about the audience being the driver of the ship at Fox. It's obvious from the executives down, they're watching what the audience responds to on social media, all of those things.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about your response. If the audience has an insatiable appetite for falsehoods, you quote this leader in Philadelphia, Al Schmidt, talking about the hunger people have for misinformation.
Yeah.
If this is what the audience wants, how do we win the battle for the American democracy? It's not everyone, but it is at least enough to drive a whole network.
No, it 100% is. And again, this goes to how complicated Fox is, right? So Bret Baier is the 6 p.m. host, 6 p.m. anchor on Fox News. He will anchor election night coverage. If Fox does get a debate, he will moderate the debate with Trump and Biden. Unlikely, but who knows? Yesterday, I didn't think there were going to be debates, and now we got 2 debates. So who the heck knows what's going to happen this year? Bret Baier loves to reply to his haters on Twitter, and his haters are Fox viewers. He has this Fox fan base, this radicalized fan base that is insistent that Trump won the election, that is insistent that Baier is part of the problem, that he's part of the deep state. And he goes on and he replies to these folks and tries to bring them into the light. And I love that he tries. I love that he's in the fight. It's what I mentioned about Bart Richards running for office. Like, there are so many ways to make an impact, to make a difference, to be in the middle of the fight. And I feel like anchors like Bret Baier are trying to do that and trying to share the truth as loudly as they can. But again, feeling that pressure from the audience, which can be debilitating. What do we do about it? There's only relatively little that each of us individually can do, but I do think it helps to be aware of this dynamic, to know what's happening in pro-Trump media, to recognize that there is this kind of Earth 1 and Earth 2 dynamic that exists, right? Because you're not going to buy a ticket to Earth 2 if you don't know it's there. You need to know, the solar system. I don't want to take that too far, but I think it's true. Right now, whatever happens in this election will be shaped in large part by what happens on partisan media, especially from right-wing media. Because the narratives that start over there end up in the rest of the media. If you were watching Sean Hannity in 2021, you were hearing about the Biden crime family, and you were hearing about the Biden border crisis. And what did we talk about the last 6 months? A Biden impeachment attempt that was predicated on a crime family. Now, it fell apart. But that was a Fox story that became a story in the rest of the world, the rest of the country. The idea of a Biden border crisis will be the defining topic of this election if it's not reproductive rights, right? So you've got to know, I think, what's happening in these different echo chambers in order to be a fully engaged citizen. And then I also think, when we're talking to folks and when we're engaging people who don't agree with us or don't share the same media diet that we do, there are ways to start from a place of shared reality. There's a way to start not from a place that's hostile, but from a place that is more constructive. And I try to include some examples of that at the end of the book. I love these groups like Braver Angels and More in Common and Big Tent USA that are trying to provide forums for what do we have in common. Then we can talk about the disagreements and the disinformation out there, but let's start maybe with some shared reality. Because maybe I'm naive. I don't think most Americans want an autocrat. I really don't. I think most Americans want a healthy political system with two vibrant parties, not a party that's been taken over by a cult leader. But again, the camera's over there. I'll probably regret it. I'll probably be disproven. I'll probably be proven wrong. I have a piece out in the New Republic magazine today about what American fascism could look like in the media world. We should be aware of the threats that are out there, but I really believe that the average Fox viewer, the average MSNBC viewer, has a lot more in common than they realize. And I love seeing organizations, groups, universities that are helping to help show people the similarities. It's the only way that we're gonna feel a little bit less polarized and a little more healed is by trying to see what that kind of, again, typical Fox fan, typical Rachel Maddow fan have in common. And again, I was a little bit dodging because I don't know the answer, but
well, you're
at least I'm self-aware enough to do that, to know I'm doing it. Right?
I love it. Well, you're sort of alluding to the methods we can take on, and you even talk about this at the end of your book about your own children kind of doing this quiz, fact versus opinion, then you stir in fact versus opinion.
They're so good at it. They
lie.
know what a fact is versus a lie.
Well,
if it's easy for them,
it
you want to know the best thing about my
us.
kids? So again, almost 7 and 4 years old. They think Trump and Biden are the same person. I joke now. Here's why. Did y'all learn that song in school where you learn all the names of the presidents? It's like Washington, Adams, Jefferson. They have this song where they learn all the presidents' names. And it goes on for a while. And by the end, you're doing like Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden. And to them, Trump, Biden is the same name. Trump, Biden, Trump, Biden. And I feel like I love where they live. They live in this great world where Trump and Biden are the same. It's all merry, it's all jovial.
We all need to go there.
I love it. I don't want to burst their bubble and tell them the truth.
Well,
I don't want to tell them.
To that point, for the generation that's coming up, I mean, the Sonnies and the Stories of the world that are coming up here.
Those are my kids' names. They're weird names.
What do they do to bridge this gap and to be sort of the midline in the media?
I think we're in an age of the best of times and worst of times when it comes to American media. Not just about right-wing media or partisan media or whatever. I think it's as true writ large that we live, again, at that garbage dump where there's so much trash and so much treasure. If you want to be well-informed and have a wide variety of sources and have a balanced media diet, it's easier than ever. It was easier this year than it was last year. It'll be easier next year. So it's the best of times in that way. And it's also the best of times when you want to get out there and start something on your own, start covering a beat, start covering a story, start covering an area. You can just go and do it in a way that was a lot easier than when I started 20 years ago blogging. That software was okay, but it was rudimentary, and most people didn't have broadband yet, and it was very early on. The ability to go out and be your own media company and your own brand just continually gets easier and better. So it's the best of times, but it's also clearly the most stressful of times because of this division that we see, because of the polarization, because of these shaky business models, because a lot of these old line brands are finding it very hard. Frankly, in a digital age, it's controlled by Google and Meta and giant tech companies. That's really the core of the problem. But when I look at this, I think to myself, we are going to have, apparently, 2 debates. We'll see what happens in June and September. And who was able to secure those debates? It wasn't like Substack. It wasn't some author on Substack. It wasn't YouTube, and it wasn't Netflix. It wasn't some brand new media institution. It wasn't some partisan rant rave place. It wasn't some radio network. It was CNN and ABC, like 2 of the old-fashioned, I say that with love, old line, old school brands, decades old, right, that have been around for a long time, that are still trusted by a lot of people, although widely distrusted as well. To me, that speaks to the enduring power of these big national media brands, no matter what pressure they're under. And the financial pressure is real. The political pressure is real. These company leaders and bosses have to stand up against the demagoguery that we're seeing by the likes of Trump. But with all that said, it's still these big American media brands that are going to hold these big debates. They're going to lead these big moments. And frankly, this November, Network of Lies is all about what happened in 2020 and beyond. We're going to be back in the same position in November 2024, where a handful of major networks and the Associated Press are going to look at the data, they're going to crunch the numbers, and they're going to tell us who's president. And as much as there's going to be a campaign of disbelief, there's going to be lies and innuendo, there's going to be disinformation, and I fear even violence. As much as that's all going to happen, there are still these big media brands that are going to tell us the truth, that are going to come at this not from right or left or whatever, but from a goal of telling us what is real. And by the way, the same guy that ran the decision desk at Fox in 2020, who accurately said Biden was the winner, who endured all the threats and all that came as a result of telling the truth, he's back. He's still in charge this fall. So I guess that gives me a little hope for the Network of Lies.
Hopefully he realizes his power. And
he does, I can tell you that.
You were talking about before that these narratives are sort of developed over time. In your book, your reporting, you show that the big lie starts as an ember. It doesn't begin as a 5-alarm fire. It's not like they put a headline out. It starts so small.
That's right.
You've got your ear to the ground. You hear these things from your sources. As we approach this election, what's the next big lie?
I think we're seeing it every day in Lower Manhattan, which is why I've been putting on the orange makeup to talk about the Trump trial. I think if you think about, there's certain moments, maybe you feel this in your career as well, there's certain moments where you're covering a story and you don't know in the moment that this is the key to everything that's going to happen in the next decade, but you look back and it's obvious. For me, that was not the 2016 election exactly. It was the 2 months after the 2016 election. I was on CNN a bunch talking about this idea of fake news. Not the fake news you're now picturing, because Donald Trump redefined the term. Fake news in 2016 meant something really specific, which were made-up stories, mostly on Facebook, designed to deceive you to make ad money, like the Brian's been killed at Gitmo thing. And those were real. That was a real thing. Some were Russian bots. Some were just, people fooling around in Peoria. And it didn't sway the election on its own, but it was a factor, right? It was one of many, many, many factors in the 2016 election. So I'm on CNN. We're all talking about this issue, this problem on Facebook, fake news. And then in January of 2017, Donald Trump started using the term fake news, not to mean those Facebook articles, but to mean CNN, right? To mean stories he didn't like, stories that he didn't want you to believe. And he weaponized and redefined that term. And I saw it, I felt it happening in that moment. And I look back and I think a lot of what we're dealing with now, or wrestling with as a country, these divisions, these disagreements, they're really all rooted in that. They're rooted in that idea that we can't agree that there's basic truths in the world, basic realities. There's always going to be a wide variety of opinions about the news, but what is the actual news? So he succeeded in many ways in creating that confusion, that cloud of confusion about a decade ago. And now, what's the version this time? What's the version we're seeing today? It's eroding trust in the rule of law, eroding trust in the courts, in the legal system, in the idea of everyone being able to get a fair trial, and everyone being equal under the law. We see it happening. I'm happy to debate it with you afterwards if you don't. But I think it's pretty clear. And I think we're going to look back and say that this trial, the hush money trial, was important not for the verdict necessarily. It doesn't really matter if he's convicted or not, because he's probably not going to go to jail, and it's a white-collar crime, and blah, blah, blah. I think that we're going to look back and say the trial mattered because, well, number one, it drew his fans in closer, the way that you always protect a family member who's in danger. But then number two, it undermined and eroded that sense of equal justice under the law, that sense that for all of the flaws of the country, at least we can believe in the courts that we're going to get a fair shake. He's telling folks every day that that's not possible anymore. And so I think that's the new big lie. I haven't said that before, but I think that's probably the new big lie. And that has implications for the fall, because with whatever happens in the election, let's pretend that he loses again, and he uses the courts to try to pursue cases. What's he going to say about the courts in that situation? So I'm rambling. I'm out of my depth, but that's what I would think is the answer.
I'll ask you one last question. Tucker Carlson is obviously the center of your book. He's sort of like your Voldemort in this particular series. Any response from him after this? Did you hear from any of your cast of characters, the Marias, the Tuckers, the executives? When they came out, did they curse your name and the house you came from?
The last time Tucker texted me. No, we have not talked since the book came out. So my approach with Tucker, he was getting pretty mean in some of his messages. So before the book, I stopped replying to him after a while. But he and I, 20 years ago, he and I were buddies. He had me on his MSNBC show. The idea that he had an MSNBC show, take me back to those days, please, right? If you go back and watch classic CNN, Bush v. Gore, one of the most contentious issues of our lifetimes, except for maybe some of the students who didn't have to go through that. It was so gentle on TV back then. Republicans and Democrats would fight, but then they would smile at the end of the segment. They actually would talk to each other on TV. It really, when you think about 20 years ago, Tucker on MSNBC, it's the good old days. But I digress. He has really radicalized both at Fox and now post-Fox. He's rendered himself pretty irrelevant off streaming on X. He's getting a far smaller audience now. So, as I mentioned, I'm editing my book for paperback. I've taken some of him out. I've been removing a couple Tucker chapters. I don't think he matters as much. But when he was on Fox in 2020 and 2021, he was critical. He was the center of the Republican movement. For a while, he was the post-Trump movement. After the Capitol was attacked, Tucker said on the air, Trump's gone. He's, quote, elderly and retiring. That was the world we lived in on January 7th of 2021, right? But now we're in a very different world, and Tucker's in a very different world, fired by Fox, off on his own, making web videos. And I think that speaks to the dangers of this arc when it comes to the network of lies. When you radicalize yourself, when you only believe what your friends are telling you, what your most hyper-partisan friends are telling you, actually. When you only believe these far-right websites, when you don't let in any dissenting information, when you don't consider how you might be led astray, you're going to end up down a path that gets kind of lonely, that gets kind of dark and lonely. And by the way, that's why I'm so glad that I moved out of Manhattan a couple years ago. So I live out on a farm now in a little red town in a red county in a blue state, New Jersey. But most of my neighbors are Trump voters. A lot of my friends, my daughter's classmates, they're Republican voters. And there is some truth to the problem of echo chambers, not just on the right, but on the left, right? When you are, kind of the stereotype of Manhattan, to be with my neighbors and to recognize that it's better to hear conflicting points of view. It's better to have those discussions. Because I think when you don't, when you're totally insulated, when you shut yourself off from the outside world, you do end up getting radicalized. You do end up isolating yourself the way that Tucker Carlson did. But I think his firing was a critical moment for Fox. It was an interesting, narrative because it speaks to what Fox is going to be in the future. Lachlan Murdoch, who is Rupert Murdoch's son, who runs Fox, lives a lot of the time in Australia, so he's not exactly working on East Coast hours, running Fox News minute by minute. But Lachlan Murdoch decided to part ways with Tucker because Lachlan loves Trump, but even Lachlan thought Tucker Carlson had gone too far. It turns out there still are some standards. Now, would argue they're way too low, but there are still some standards. And this gets me in trouble with kind of liberal Fox haters, but I'll say it. I think the air is a little bit cleaner at Fox as a result. The information pollution I described, it's still there, but it's a little bit less in scope because of his removal from Fox. And so that indicates to me that pressure matters, advertiser pressure, also viewer pressure, what Lachlan's friends thought of Tucker, being embarrassed by the host on the air was a thing. There were all sorts of pain points, all sorts of pressure points, and it did matter. I guess I should say, read the rest in the book, but there you go. But that is true. I think I'm getting distracted from your question, though.
Well, we're running out of time, so I just want to say, regardless of whatever the network is, whether it's Fox, whether it's CNN, whether it's MSNBC, we know that you're going to be watching and absorbing as the pain sponge.
I love being the pain sponge.
To benefit the rest of us.
And there's a bunch of pain sponges, and we need those.
It's valuable.
We do, and not just on the left, not just on the right. I was on a webcast yesterday with a guy. It's a group called Media Research Center, Newsbusters, which is it's an outlet that operates from the right that tracks what's being said on CNN, MSNBC, et cetera. And they've given me a hard time every once in a while. But again, I'd rather be in dialogue, right? We're better off having those conversations, and we're better off having that kind of monitoring and that criticism happening from all directions, as long as it's constructive and not destructive. You always read those surveys about how much trust there is in American media. Sometimes you see headlines saying there's no trust in America. No one trusts the media anymore. It's nonsense. Everybody trusts the media, it's just that we trust different sources. And some of them are a lot more reliable than others. But I know that when there's a tornado warning or a flood near my town, I damn well trust my local meteorologist. I trust my local newspaper, which has a great digital operation. And by the way, I've thought about volunteering there because, if we don't like our local sources, let's try to make them better. Let's go and volunteer and make a difference. But we do trust our media sources when it really matters, when it really makes a difference. And to the extent that they let us down, that we lose trust, we can be part of the solution. We can volunteer. We can submit something. We can go launch a rival. We can make our own startup brands. That's the opportunity, especially for the students in the room, to be the change that you want to see in the media.
And part of that solution, constructive criticism, and that's why we
Yeah.
are here tonight. So
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you all so much. Thanks so much. Come say hi afterwards or email me on bstelter@gmail.com. I always like to share that with the students, that would be helpful in the future. Thank you all.